So please prepare yourselves, and I'll get this recording started.
So look, I'm going to talk today really mostly about what I do as a curator here at the National Museum, but I want to try and draw some kind of generalities from that in terms of how there's a series of curatorial practices, if you like, tools and techniques and methods that I think could be of interest to your students and of interest to you in developing extension history courses. I want to talk about what I do as a curator, and then from that also talk a little bit about the kinds of history that I think museums are particularly good at creating and communicating. I think this is something I'd really like to discuss, because I think it's not necessarily very well understood that museums, as Dave insisted by putting up my quote at the beginning of in his slide, is that I think museums create a very particular kind of history. It's not the kind of history that gets created in books or indeed in films or in, I don't know, compositions. It's a very particular kind of history that grows out of the fact that museums are centrally interested and defined by their collections. I should say that's not an uncontested view of museums, but it's certainly my view of museums. So curators try to understand material culture as evidence of other people's lives, as a means to try to understand other people, what they looked like, what they did, how they made a living, what they hoped for in their lives, how they tried to construct their world, and why they made particular choices. And one way in which curators differ from other historians is therefore in focus in terms of how we interrogate the past, what elements we use to communicate the past. Most academic historians are trained very much in the discipline of words, and they concentrate on words. Still today, I think, although it's changing a little bit. If you go through university history, I think primarily you are encouraged to draw on things like archival accounts, manuscripts, now oral histories, and most of that work is actually promulgated in the form of books. There's also other kinds of historians. Obviously, filmmakers and photographers concentrate on creating images of the world and arranging them in meaningful sequences. But curators attend to objects. We look at objects as evidence of the past and try to arrange objects in meaningful ways called exhibitions.
All right, now this one is definitely tending towards the very hard end of the scale. Let me just give you a bit of advice. She was speaking very quickly. Do not do what she does in the PTE speaking part of the exam. Okay, if you do that, the computer will be struggling to understand what you're saying because she's not properly emphasizing all of her syllables, right? And she'd probably end up getting like a 50, even though she's a native speaker, right? So you do need to be a bit careful in the way that you actually produce your words. That being said, right, one thing I did notice though is that even though there were parts of her speech that were like blah, 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 right, the important key words, she actually did take the time to emphasize those ones properly. So even if you didn't fully understand what she was saying, if you're honing your listening skill and you have a good vocabulary, you could actually probably catch most of the important keywords that she said. She did slow down quite a bit on those on purpose. Okay. V says, what if I make some mistakes in the relationships between the keywords, right? So, you know, if your summary sentences don't fully make sense, that's fine, right? One of the nice things about the PTE from an exam point of view is that the modern computer that marks you is not actually smart enough to understand what you're saying, right? It's literally just doing like a Control F word search to see if you got the correct keywords. So even if you say something that doesn't really make sense, you won't be penalized for it at all. It's one of the nice things about the PTE. I think a lot of people here might have come from the IELTS test, right? If you come from an IELTS background, everything has to make sense. Everything has to be cohesive and linked together. In the PTE, there is no such requirement. Yeah. All right. Fantastic. Now we've got quite a few keywords here. Looks like a lot of you guys took down a huge number of keywords. All right. I'll just quickly copy this directly from the chat. Oh, whoops. Sorry. Where's all my words? Just a moment. Okay, there we go. Right. So we've got National Museum, history, courses, curators, not well understood. I've got quite a lot of different word groups here. Andy's also given me a large number. There we go. And Sophia as well. All right, and you can see, right, you guys have a lot of overlap with your keywords, which is pretty normal. Okay, so I've got words like curators, the National Museum, history courses, defined by their collections, and so on. Okay, and I think in general, all right, most of you probably did very well in terms of your keyword collections, right? Now, I'm not going to go through these in too much detail. You can check yourself whether or not you managed to get the correct keywords, right? It's already quite impressive that you managed to take down so much. All right, so for this one, once again, we have a couple of main ideas. Now, one thing you might have noticed is that in the beginning, she wasted almost 30 seconds on an introduction where she didn't really say anything. Okay, she said, today I'm going to be talking about curating, and then she wasted a lot of time talking about completely irrelevant stuff. About halfway through the lecture, though, she actually did start talking about curating, right? So the first point is, what is curating, right? Or what is a museum curator's job, right? So they say museum curators, right, try to understand people from the past, right, by looking at their objects, right, their belongings. And she gave a big list of examples of different things that they look at. Okay, so that's kind of the job of a curator, right? You might also say they also hold exhibitions, right? Since she's working at a museum, that's also definitely part of her job. Okay, fantastic, right? Now, the second part, just like the first lecture that we listened to, was a bit of a comparison, okay? So that in comparison, right, historians from universities, right, often look at text and literature. Okay, so in other words, curators, they look at physical objects as proof of the past, whereas historians, they look at texts and literature. Does that make sense to everyone? Right, and so you can see, right, the number of keywords that most of you guys wrote down was longer than my whole summary. Right, so what you've got is when you start saying things like collections or interrogate and stuff like that, these are, a lot of them are paraphrases of the keywords I've already used, right? And a lot of them are extra details. So if you're wondering why some summaries look very short and some are longer, the longer ones just contain more extra details, right? But those details are not strictly necessary. So just as a quick example, for instance here, right, I can't remember whose notes this was, right? But we've got the word collections. We've also got the word exhibitions, right? In my summary, I just use the word exhibitions. But the point is, collections and exhibitions are talking about the same thing, right? So you don't necessarily need both of those in your summary for it to be correct. As long as you choose one of them and mention it, right, that's that particular point, got it. Does that make sense to everyone? Right? Yeah, so if you're wondering why some summaries look a lot longer than other ones, that's the reason why, right? These sentences are definitely enough to get full marks in terms of content, yes, right? They are not enough to get full marks in terms of some of the other things. So the other things, for example, it's not enough to get full marks in terms of word count, because the word count requires 50 to 70 words. So I need to add a few more words to this in order to get my word count score. I probably also need to add a few more words to this to get my written discourse score, right? Written discourse is looking at how many different sentence structures and connecting verbs and stuff like that I'm using. So with only 2 short sentences, I might not have enough of that. I want to put in some slightly more complex sentence structures and things like that. But that's all pretty nice and easy. Okay, so adding extra words on is usually not the difficult part. Right. Today, we're mostly focusing on the content aspect, and this is the required information that must be in it. Yeah. So you don't get awarded for extra detail, right? So for example, right, if I say something here, like, for example, and I can start listing a lot of different objects that she mentioned, right? And then here I can say, for example, right, oral histories and so on, right? Books, movies, and so on. I could list a lot of examples here, and I could increase my word count, but it does not increase my content score. Yeah. Right. Yeah, so if you need the word count, that's when you add in the extra details, okay? But you just want to understand those are optional, right? So today we're just looking at what are the most important points, the necessary content points that you need, All right. Yeah, and you'll notice this when I teach these things, I try to simplify it as much as possible for you guys, because what I want you to do is I want you to understand the main points, and I want you to understand the structure of the actual lecture, right? In this case, the comparative and the historical structure. Yeah. Okay, wonderful.